Hi, nice to see you all. So a couple of years ago, I coined this term enshittification to describe how online platforms decay, and it describes a three-stage process. First, you have platforms that are good to their end users, but find a way to lock those end users in. So think of Google, which initially minimized ads and maximized the spend on engineering for high-quality search results. But as they were doing that, they were also buying their way to dominance. So that no matter which browser you used, no matter what mobile operating system you were using, no matter which carrier you had, you would always be searching on Google by default. So Google then spent tens of billions of dollars every year to make sure that no one would ever try a search engine that wasn't Google, thus locking their users in. So that is stage one, in which a platform is good to its end users, but also locks in those users. In stage two, platforms start to abuse their users in order to tempt in business customers. So for Google, obviously, that's advertisers and web publishers. So today, an ever larger fraction of a Google results page is given over to ads, and those ads are marked out with ever subtler, ever smaller type that says the word ad next to it. So, and Google uses commercial surveillance to target ads to us. So that's stage two, making things better for business customers while making things worse for end users. But those business customers also become dependent on the platform, just like the users are locked into the platform. After all, as soon as a business is getting like 10% of its customer or its revenue from one source, it becomes very vulnerable to that source. Very few businesses can stand a 10 or 20% reduction overnight in their gross revenue. And so once the business customers are locked into the platform, you get stage three of enshittification. This is where Google claws back all the value in the platform, both from business customers and from end users, leaving behind just like a homeopathic residue of value, just enough to keep everyone locked in while the rest of the value is gathered in for its shareholders and executives, and Google becomes enshittified. And you've probably noticed this. Google search results suck these days. And thanks to the 2024 Department of Justice antitrust case against Google, we know why it sucks. It starts in 2019 when Google found that its growth had stalled out. After all, more than 90% of the world was using Google to search, and we searched for everything. Any idea that came into our head, we typed into a search box, and always that search box belonged to Google. So how is Google going to grow? There were no more users left to switch to Google. The users who use Google were already using Google to search for everything. Well, after the trial last year, we got these internal memos that showed what Google did in order to boost growth. What they did was they made search worse. They reduced the system's accuracy so that you would have to search more than once to get the results that you were looking for, which meant that they would have more queries and therefore more opportunities to serve ads to you. And even as Google was doing that to its end users, it was also doing another dirty trick to its business customers. Google and Meta entered into a secret, illegal, collusive arrangement they codenamed Jedi Blue that raised the price of advertising and reduced the payout to publishers. So that's how we get to the enshittified Google that we all live with today, where every query starts with a blob of AI slop at the top of it, and then there's 5 paid results tagged with the word ad in 8-point type that's 90% gray on white, which in turn sits over 10 spammy links from SEO companies that have generated their own AI slop. And yet we still keep using Google because we are all locked into Google. And that is enshittification as seen from the outside. First, a company is good to its end users, then it locks them in, and then it is good to its business customers, who then get locked in, and then it takes all the value for itself, leaving behind a giant pile of shit. That is enshittification, a tragedy in 3 acts. Enshittification follows the cloud because every app makes a call to the cloud to ask how it could perform at every moment. Take the way that gig workers are paid. The legal scholar Veena Dubal coined a term to describe how Uber drivers' wages are calculated. She calls it algorithmic wage discrimination. And here's how the trick works. If you're an Uber driver and you've been picky about the jobs that you're willing to take recently, the app starts to put the wage offer up and up and up. But if you yield to temptation and start to take those higher payouts, the wage starts to go down again, toggling down in random intervals at small increments designed to be below the threshold for human perception, until eventually the Uber driver finds himself having gone into debt to buy a new car, having given up the side hustles that they had that used to let them be more picky about Uber, with their wage descending and descending until they end up seeking government assistance just to buy groceries. This is the technical mechanism by which enshittification takes place, and I call it twiddling. Digital businesses have infinite flexibility that comes from the marvelous flexibility of the computers that sit underneath them. And that means that every firm can reach into its business logic at will and twiddle the knobs that control the fundamental aspects of that business. So every time you interact with a firm, everything is different. The price, the cost, the search rankings, the recommendations. Twiddling is just a crude task that's done quickly. Any task that's simple but time-consuming, as we know, is a natural for automation. The wage theft of algorithmic wage discrimination would be unbearably tedious and labor-intensive and expensive to perform manually. No 19th century boiler room full of guys in green eye shades slaving over ledgers could do this. You need digitalization to do this. You need the cloud to do this. The bosses who are doing this, they're not more evil than the bosses we had 10, 20, or 100 years ago. These are just the same bosses with better tools. Digitalization, the weaving of cloud computing through a firm or a sector, enables the kind of twiddling that allows a firm to shift value around, from business users to end users, from end users back to business users, back to the shareholders and the investors, leaving behind nothing but a pile of shit. And every sector is moving to the cloud, which means that enshittification is coming to every sector. Which is why it's foolish to say, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. This is a dead end. The surveillance capitalism idea says that companies like Apple are virtuous alternatives because Apple is charging us money and not attention, which means that they can treat us better. They don't have to exploit us. And that is a superficially logical idea. After all, in 2022, Apple did add a little checkbox to iOS that allows you to opt out of third-party surveillance, most notably the surveillance of Meta and its products, Facebook and Instagram. And 96% of Apple users ticked the "Don't Spy on Me" box. We have to assume the other 4% were either drunk or Facebook employees who were drunk, which makes sense, because if I worked for Facebook, I would be drunk all the time. Thank you. So on the face of it, it seems like Apple is not treating its customers like the product. But as this was going on, as the tick box for "Don't Spy on Me" was being added to iOS, Apple shipped another secret feature to iOS, a new way to spy on iOS users for Apple's own ad targeting service. This is exactly the same purpose, targeting ads to you based on the places you've been, the things you'd searched for, the communications you'd had, the links you'd clicked on. Now, Apple did not ask its customers for permission to spy on them. It didn't let them opt out of the spying. It didn't tell them about the spying. When the newspapers printed that it was illegally and secretly spying on its users, Apple lied about it. So Apple treats its business customers, the app vendors, like they're the product. It takes 30 cents out of every euro that those app vendors bring in. That is 3,000% the normal payment processing fee. Apple treats its end users like the product. You shell out 1,000 euros for a phone, and you still get spied on to target ads to you. Apple is treating everyone like the product. In enshittification, the product is just whatever you can productize. Everyone is the product, everyone gets twiddled because you have been conscripted into the tech industry because your industry was digitalized. So it's tempting to blame the cloud for this. But tech companies were not born enshittified. They spent years, decades, making good products. If you're old enough to remember the launch of Google, you will recall that at the outset, searching on Google was magic. You could ask Jeeves questions for 1,000,000 years, and you would never get an answer as crisp, as useful, and as helpful as the answer you would get from just typing a few vaguely descriptive search terms into a Google box. That's why we bought iPhones. That's why we joined our friends on Facebook. All of these services were born on the cloud. They could have enshittified at any time, but they didn't until they did, and then they all did it at once. Enshittification was not caused by changes to technology or the character of the people who ran technology firms. It was caused by changes to the policy environment. After all, social factors are far more important than the parameters of a technology. Social factors are the difference between a chime in your car that warns you when you've crossed the lane line and a system that tells your insurance company that you drifted out of your lane so they can add 10 euros to your insurance bill this month. We changed the rules of the game in living memory, but named parties undertook these changes. They were warned at the time about the likely results of these changes, and they today are very rich and very respected, and they have never faced any accountability for creating this crimogenic environment which led to a vast enshittening of everything. And I think that there is some good news buried in this hypothesis, because if enshittification is the result not of a new kind of evil person or of the great forces of history bearing down on this moment to turn everything into shit, but rather the result of specific policy choices, then we can reverse those policies. We can make better ones. We can emerge from this moment, the Enshitticene, and we can consign the Enshitternet to the scrap heap of history, making it a mere transitional state between the old good internet that we remember and a new good internet that we deserve. So let's talk about the kind of corporation that emerges when you create this crimogenic environment. Every firm wants to maximize profits. Every user you don't spend on suppliers, workers, or product quality is a euro you retain for executives and investors. But companies can't just charge infinity and pay nothing, because no one would work for them and no one would buy those products. Those market constraints act as a disciplining force on firms and the way that they treat the people that they buy and sell things from. And in tech, there are three constraints, three anti-enshittificatory sources of discipline that makes products and services better. Now, the first constraint, obviously, is the market. All other things being equal, a business that charges more and delivers less will lose customers to firms that are more generous about how much value they share with their customers, their suppliers, and their workers. This is the ideological basis of antitrust law, which is what our American cousins call competition law. And their first antitrust law came in 1890 with John Sherman's Sherman Act. And when Senator Sherman was stumping for this act, he said on the floor of the Senate, if we would not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of the necessaries of life. If we would not submit to an emperor, we should not submit to an autocrat of trade. Lacking competitors, companies become autocrats of trade. They become too big to fail, which makes them too big to jail, which means that they're too big to care. So what happened to that disciplining force of competition? Well, we killed it. Starting about 40 years ago, neoliberal economists adopted a radical new antitrust theory called consumer welfare. They threw out John Sherman's idea that we should be on the watch for autocrats of trade, and instead they installed a new idea that monopolies are presumptively efficient. They did this all around the world, in the EU, in the US, in the UK, and across Asia. And the idea was that if Google has a 90% search market share, which it does, then we should assume that Google is the best search engine ever, the best search engine possible, and that the only reason that a better search engine hasn't stepped in is that Google is so skilled, so efficient, that there is no conceivable way to improve on it. We can tell that Google is the best because Google has a monopoly, and we can tell that Google has a good monopoly because it is the best. So 40 years ago, we adopted this explicitly pro-monopoly policy, and 40 years later, we have monopolies. Monopolies in pharmaceuticals, beer, glass bottles, vitamin C, athletic shoes, microchips, cars, mattresses, eyeglasses, and of course, professional wrestling. The economists who conceived of those policies are still around today. They're still polishing their fake Nobel Prizes, teaching at elite schools, making billions of dollars consulting for blue chip companies. It's like we used to put down rat poison and we didn't have a rat problem, and then these guys told us to stop, and now rats are chewing our faces off, and there they are making these innocent faces saying, how can you be so sure that our anti-rat policies are responsible for the rat problems we have today? Maybe we are simply living in the time of the rat. Maybe sunspots caused rats to multiply beyond all measure. And if those rats then bought the rat poison factories and shut them down, well, so what of it? Shutting down rat poison factories after you've decided not to put down rat poison, that is economically rational. It is a Pareto optimal decision. Markets don't discipline tech companies because tech companies don't compete with their rivals. They buy their rivals. Now, that's a quote from Mark Zuckerberg, who famously said, "It is better to buy than to compete." Which is why Mark Zuckerberg bought Instagram for $1 billion when it only had 12 employees and 25 million registered users. But I said there are three forces that discipline competition. And the second of these forces, that's regulation, the discipline that is imposed by governments. And it's a mistake to see the discipline of markets and the discipline of states as being separate. They are intimately connected because competition is a necessary condition for effective regulation. Once a sector cartelizes, once it collapses into oligarchy, once it becomes so inbred that it develops a Habsburg jaw, once the internet became 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of the other 4, then that sector captures its regulators. Because a sector with 100 SMEs is a rabble. They are at each other's throat. They can't agree on anything. They can't agree on how to lobby. But when a sector turns into 5 companies, it is a conspiracy in waiting. A sector that has been boiled down to a mere handful of firms can agree on a common lobbying position, and they are so insulated from what Peter Thiel calls wasteful competition that they are a slosh in cash, and they mobilize that cash to turn their regulatory priorities into regulations. In other words, they capture their regulators. So regulatory capture may sound abstract and complicated, but I'll put it into concrete terms. The GDPR is today 9 years old, and small EU ad tech firms, companies that were small enough to fail and therefore small enough to jail, they went extinct in droves after the GDPR was passed. But big US tech companies, most notably Google and Meta, they continue to wipe their butts with the GDPR. How do they get away with this? Simple. They pretend they're Irish. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Ireland is a tax haven, and every tax haven is a crime haven. Because a company that can pretend that it's Irish this week, next week it can pretend that it's Luxembourgeois, Cypriot, Maltese, or Danish, or Dutch rather. So to keep a company from decamping to a more pliable competitor nation, tax havens have to offer a basket of regulatory gifts to the countries that headquarter there. Which is why in Ireland, the data protection regulator barely gets out of bed. And when they do, they only give companies the softest of wrist slaps. And so US tech companies that pretend to be Irish violate the GDPR. And once those cases arrive in Ireland, they die. And it's not just Ireland. In the UK, the antitrust regulator is called the Competition and Markets Authority. And until very recently, it was run by a very effective fellow named Markus Bokerink. But last month, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, fired Markus Bokerink and replaced him with a guy called Doug Gurr, whose previous job was being the head of Amazon UK. So competition is dead. Regulation is dead. Companies are no longer disciplined by markets, nor are they disciplined by states. But there are 3 forces that discipline firms that contribute to an inhospitable environment for the reproduction of sociopathic and shitifying monsters in the C-suite. So let's talk about the other force, my favorite one, interoperability, the principle of 2 or more things working together. In the non-digital world, interop is hard. To make a light socket that works with any light bulb, you're going to have to agree on the direction, the pitch, and the diameter of the thread, the voltage, the amperage, and the wattage of the socket, or someone gets their hand blown off the next time they change a light bulb. But in the digital world, interop is built in, because the only computer we know how to make is the Turing-complete universal von Neumann machine, a computing machine capable of running every valid program, which means that for every enshittifying program, there is a disenshittifying program that you can install. So if HP writes a program to ensure that its printers only use OEM ink, someone else can write a program that disables that program so you can use any ink you want. Now, in the US, a company called Para shipped an app to help DoorDash drivers get paid more. Because in the US, DoorDash drivers make most of their money from tips, but the DoorDash driver app hides the tip amount until you irrevocably commit to the job. So you don't know when you accept a job whether it's worth $1.50 or $11.50 with a $10 tip. So Para, they made an app that peeked inside the JSON object that got transmitted to the driver's phone, found the tip, and revealed it. So the driver could decide whether they wanted to take that job or not. But DoorDash shut Para's app down. Because in America, apps like Para's were illegal because in 1998, Bill Clinton signed a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, and Section 1201 of the DMCA makes it a felony to bypass an access control for a copyrighted work, with penalties of a $500,000 fine and a 5-year prison sentence for a first offense. Which is why, just the act of reverse engineering the DoorDash app, peeling away the DRM wrapper, became a potential felony. Which is why companies are so desperately horny to get you to stop using their websites and start using their apps. The web is open, apps are closed. The majority of web users have installed an ad blocker. No app user has installed an ad blocker because it's a felony to distribute such a tool because you would have to reverse engineer the app to do it. An app is just a website you wrap in the right kind of IP so that the company that made it can send you to prison if you modify it so that it serves your interests instead of the OEM's. Now, Europe adopted its own version of the DMCA in 2001 with Article 6 of the Copyright Directive, which copy-pasted the US Digital Millennium Copyright Act into European regulation. And the Commission was warned at the time that making it illegal to bypass digital locks would interfere with the repair of tractors, cars, ventilators, insulin pumps. Europeans warned them that laws banning tampering with digital locks would let American tech giants corner digital markets, force them to buy their apps and their games from American app stores, that they could cream off any commission that they wanted from. They warned that these laws were a gift to monopolists who would jack up the price of ink, that these copyright laws, far from serving European artists, would lock them into American platforms because every time someone in a European creator's audience buys a book or a game or a video or a song, it is locked to an American app and can never be unlocked. So if you're an artistic worker and you're in the EU and you want to migrate to a European competitor of an American firm, your audience can't come with you unless they're prepared to abandon their whole library because you cannot give them a tool to convert their files to work from one app and then in another. The Commission ignored these warnings, and now we live in a world where it is illegal to tamper with digital locks. Which means that if HP puts a digital lock on its printers that verifies you're not using third-party ink or refilling the HP ink cartridge, it's a crime to bypass that lock, which is how HP has gotten away with raising the price of ink. Printer ink today is the most expensive fluid you can buy as a civilian without obtaining a special permit. The colored liquid that you print your grocery list with costs more milliliter for milliliter than the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion. So that's the world the Copyright Directive gave us. A world where a farmer can't fix their tractor, an independent mechanic can't fix your car, where a hospital during the pandemic couldn't fix its ventilators. So we got monopolies. Monopolies capture their regulators. They get to ignore the laws they don't like. They prevent laws that might interfere with their predatory conduct from being passed. They mobilize IP laws so that they can wield government power to prevent new companies from entering the market. That is the origin of enshittification. Multiple changes to the environment led to the threefold collapse of competition, regulation, and interoperability, which created the enshittigenic environment where the greediest, most sociopathic elements in the body corporate thrive at the expense of those elements that act as moderators on their enshittificatory impulses. And until we fix that environment, the contagion will spread to other firms. So how do we create a hostile environment for enshittifiers? Well, first, there's antitrust. After 40 years of antitrust decline, this decade has seen a massive increase in antitrust enforcement. Now, it's true. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom did just replace the head of the Competition and Markets Authority with the guy who used to run Amazon UK. But the thing that makes this so tragic is that the Competition and Markets Authority has done incredible work, and they did it under a conservative government. And in the EU, we've got the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act going after the big tech with both barrels, shifting GDPR enforcement away from Ireland and to the federal courts. And in other countries around the world, Australia, Germany, France, Japan, South Korea, and China, yes, including China, there are new antitrust laws, new major antitrust enforcement actions, and these countries collaborate with each other. So we had the UK Competition and Markets Authority using its investigatory powers to research and publish a deep market study on Apple's abuse of 30% app tax. And then the EU used that report as the basis for an enforcement action against Apple, which took billions of euros out of them. And then the South Korean and Japanese enforcers translated the European case and ran it successfully on their countries too. Well, what are we going to do about regulatory capture? People are getting smarter about regulatory capture. Europe has passed these muscular right to repair laws. They have the DMA moving and repair beg your pardon. But the DMA and these repair regulations have been hamstrung because neither of these laws permit Europeans to acquire tools to break a digital lock, which means that you only get to add a third-party app store to your iPhone if you do so on the terms that Apple has pushed through the European Commission, and those terms are nearly impossible to satisfy. And it still means you can't interpret a car's diagnostic messages so any mechanic can fix it, and so on, because the digital locks stop you from doing it, because giving someone a tool to break a digital lock remains illegal under Article 6 of the Copyright Directive. And of course, every printer, every smart speaker, every car, every tractor, every appliance, every medical implant has a digital lock that stops you from fixing it, modifying it, or using third-party parts, software, or consumables with it. Which means that the big tech disciplining forces of these laws on repair and interoperability have become hamstrung. Well, why don't we just get rid of Article 6 of the Copyright Directive? Well, to understand that, you have to understand why the Copyright Directive was passed in the first place. It was because the US Trade Representative said that if Europe wanted tariff-free access to American markets, they would have to pass this law. Now, I don't know if you've heard, Donald Trump is getting rid of tariff-free access to American markets. Now, the reflexive response to this has been to threaten retaliatory tariffs. This is what we've done in my country of Canada. Like all the best Americans, I'm a Canadian. Retaliatory tariffs make every American good that you import more expensive for the people who live in your country, which is a very weird way to punish America. It's like Europe, it's punching itself in the face so hard that they hope that America says, ouch. You know what would be better? If the European Union laws that protect US big tech companies were abolished so that European competitors could step in. Make it legal to reverse engineer, jailbreak, and modify American technology products and services. Make it legal for European mechanics to jailbreak a Tesla and unlock every subscription feature like autopilot and full access to your battery for one price forever. And when you sell it, the next owner will get those features as well, meaning your car is now worth more used. That is how you hurt Elon Musk, not by being performatively offended by his Nazi salute. He likes the attention. You have to strike at his rent-extracting, insanely high-margin sources of recurring revenue. You have to kick him right in the dongle. Thank you. Let Europeans stand up a European app store for games consoles and mobile devices that charges 3% to process a transaction, not 30%. So every European news outlet that sells subscriptions through an app and every European software author, musician, and writer who sells through a mobile platform or a games platform gets a 25% increase in revenue overnight before they've signed up a single new customer. But of course, they will sign up new customers by selling jailbreaking software and access to European app stores for every mobile device and games console to everyone in the world, and by pitching every games publisher and app maker on selling through those European app stores to customers everywhere without paying the 30% tax to American monopolists, they could sell every mechanic in the world a €100 per month subscription to a universal diagnostic tool. And every farmer in the world could buy a kit that would let them fix their John Deere tractor. They would beat a path to your door. The EU could become a tech export powerhouse while making everything cheaper for European citizens, while making everything more profitable for anyone who sells media or software in an app store. And this is the best part. They would do it by frontally assaulting the most lucrative lines of business of the most profitable companies in the S&P 500 whose CEOs sat behind Trump on the dais, zeroing out those recurring sources of revenue immediately, globally, overnight, forever. That is how you win a trade war. We are entering a period of omni-shambolic polycrisis. The long, ominous rumble of climate change, authoritarianism, genocide, xenophobia, and transphobia turned into an avalanche. The perpetrators of these crimes against humanity have weaponized the internet, colonizing the 21st century's digital nervous system, using it to attack its host, threatening civilization itself. The Enshittification was purpose-built for this kind of apocalyptic co-option, organized around giant corporations who would trade a habitable planet and human rights for a 3% tax cut, who blocked the interoperability that would let us escape their clutches. It did not have to be this way. The Enshittification was not inevitable. We do not have to be eternal prisoners of the catastrophic policy blunders of clueless lawmakers. A new good internet is possible and necessary. We can build it. We can imbue it with the technological self-determination of the old good internet and the ease of use of Web 2.0. We can build a place where we can resist and survive climate collapse, fascism, genocide, and authoritarianism. A new good internet. We can build that internet, and we must. Thank you.